Well, for more on this, I'm joined this evening here in the newsroom by Asif Arif, who's Director of Public Affairs of the Ahmadiyya community, an attorney also and an advisor to the socialist government on questions of secularism. We're delighted to have you with us. Also joining us live from Berlin, Jan St-Pierre, the CEO of Moscon, which is a security consultancy. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. First of all, Asif Arif, we were just hearing there, France is engaged in a number of theatres that make it a natural enemy for a variety of different jihadist organisations, for a number of different Islamist extremist organisations. But that's not all. France is also, and this is something that really came to the forefront at the time of the Charlie Hebdo attacks, a strongly secular nation that really shouts its secularism. And that's another of the reasons that it's been particularly attacked over the last few years, and that it's excited the anger of jihadists.
Yes, because when we see the last couple of years, when you see the debate on secularism and when you see how it attacks the Muslim community over here, it brings up some subject on which they can attach themselves and tell, you see, Muslim people, you are being hijacked by your rights and everything. So let's see what Daesh can do about this. We can kill people. And of course, Muslim community in France is not, I mean, they are not under charm by this speech of Daesh. But of course, this speech and this way of talking can trigger some people who are in such state of mind or in such precarity situation. And that's exactly what Daesh is trying to do.
And that's something, Jan St-Pierre, that seems to have been fairly effective here in France. There is, of course, Europe's largest Muslim population, whilst the great majority, of course, does not adhere to the sort of call that the jihadists are making. There are those, perhaps at the margins of society, disaffected, disabused young men and women who have heeded that call, who've gone to fight in Syria and Iraq, and more recently, who've decided to stay at home and carry out the struggle here.
Yes, first of all, good evening. Indeed, and I think the fact that we possibly have another attacker that was under 20 years old, which is also one of the, been often the case in the recent attacks in Germany and elsewhere, we're definitely dealing with a lot of young people under 30, under 20 that feel they don't belong or can't find their place in society. That's a big issue. And another issue internally for France is that there's been a big struggle. I mean, going back 10 years, 12 years with the riots and again last week, more riots and work issues. There's a lot of frustration in French society as a whole. And this is a perfect, radicalism and the discourse of extremists, especially like Daesh. It's a perfect outlet for these people. And unfortunately, France and the population are paying the price.
I think, yes, there is the French level of seeing this problem of terrorism and everything. But I think some people do not analyze the European level of this threat too.
And we've seen an awful and a dreadful week in Germany, for instance.
Yeah, exactly. But also we need to take into account that Daesh is following all the news of what is happening under the European territory. And what they can see is that, for example, the Brexit, who can be something that you cannot think about, but who is dividing the Europe, is something very useful for Daesh because they are going to use this against European population.
Jan St-Pierre, it is, I suppose, one of the assumptions that one has to make that the Islamic State group and those who adhere to their call, to their cause, living here in Europe, even if they're not specifically linked to them in any concrete and tangible sense, will be looking at the series of events over the course of the last few weeks and the violence that has become almost a part of our daily lives in countries like France and Germany, it seems, over the course of the last few months, and that will be encouraging, feeding the minds of those who have these sorts of violent aspirations.
Absolutely, and to follow up with what was said currently, it's exactly this. It's a principle of divide and conquer, and also to notice, there was once upon a time, about 5, 6, 7 years ago, France had this aura of invincibility in terms of counterterrorism. I remember quite well an article in Foreign Affairs where France was presented as the worst place to be a jihadi in the Western world. Germany also had this aura where now the dam is broken. People, to use the expression, they've seen blood, and they know that their enemy can be weakened, that it can be hurt, and obviously they feel now that they want to take part as well. And the fact that they're going low scale, not sophisticated, using knives, using kitchen knives, using cars, it just shows that they'll take anything that's at hand to perform the attacks. And the fact that we're seeing a streak now throughout Europe of such attacks, including just before the Brexit with Joe Cox, even if it's not Islamic terrorism, it is nonetheless extremism and terrorism. There's a mood for it, and everybody just feels that it is appropriate now to express these grievances in a very violent way and note that the authorities don't seem to be in a position to stop them.
It seems almost impossible to imagine, Asif Arif, what the authorities can do. We said it after the Nice attack. How do you prevent a man who's not even flagged up to security services from renting a truck and ploughing it into a crowd of people? The same thing comes to mind tonight. These men, at least one of them we now believe, and we'll know more tonight, was being actively watched, we believe, by French security services. And yet, how do you keep people, even if you know they should be being watched, under watch all the time in order to prevent this sort of attack? And all they used were knives.
I think, well, all the propositions that they are currently led by Les Républicains, by putting some administrative center for the fichier S, the potential radicalized people, to put them into the center is not really, it's against our principle, it's against fundamental rights. So that's not the good solution. But on the other hand, we cannot find any proper solution. And I think the solution should come from the civil population, because we always look forward to what authority will do, what our politician will do. But at the same time, French people will say, we are over politics. Yeah. So the thing is, I think population can do something. When you see, you mentioned the fact that I'm director of public affairs of Ahmadiyya Muslim community. For example, when Ahmadiyya Muslim community learned about this attack, what we suggest is to go on Sunday and to pray with the church member, local church member, and that's a strong condemnation of what is happening to our Christian brother. And I think the response, the positive response, will come from population, and then after it's the liability from media to cover it up a little bit, because the thing is that Daesh can only live and can only gain strength if we continue mediatizing his acting and his way of killing people.
Which
and
inevitably
everything.
we do. I wanted to put to you on that question of the divisions, Yann Saint-Pierre, that we've been talking about so far. The targeting this time of a church, the mention of the crusade and the subsequent communique on the part of the Islamic State group. This is perhaps a new form of attack. It's the first time a church has been successfully attacked here in France. There have been attempts in the past. This adds a new dimension to it, as we were just hearing a moment ago, that touches on the religious divides that clearly the Islamic State group is hoping to worsen.
I totally agree with this, and I also agree with the need to include the civil population into the solutions. This is exactly this. Daesh finds a way to always escalate the violence. They hit so-called soft targets. They go for airports, public transport, stadiums. But attacking a church, even if you're in a secular system, it's still a no-go. Attacking any religious building is a taboo. And by deliberately saying we're going to attack a church, they really want to incite even more hate and struggles between Muslims and Catholics. And this is a way for them to really escalate the whole process. It's part of their strategy, and I fully agree. The real response will come from the population. Will they let themselves be divided by such actions, or will they show resiliency? And I think in France, I think in Europe in general, we'll see the latter.
Now, the French President, Yann Saint-Pierre, stay with you for a moment, made clear again in his pronouncement immediately after the attack on the outskirts of Rouen there, that this was about war, that the Islamic State group would be taken on, just as he did after Nice. It would be sought out in its redoubts. Clearly, the French government believes that pushing the Islamic State group back on the ground is crucial to winning the security war here in France.
Well, I think I would not like to be in François Hollande and President Hollande's position right now, because it's basically damned if you do, damned if you don't. You know, there's people in France are clearly disappointed with their leaders as a whole. There seems to be no solution to attacks that have been going on now for over a year and a half on a regular basis. And the response last November was to increase the airstrikes against Daesh in Syria. The results haven't been there. And so if he starts saying now, well, you know, we'll have a more a comprehensive approach. My plan is, 2 or 3 years or 5 years or 10 years, that's political suicide. And so he needs to find this balance between being, the strong leader that will respond forcefully, but at the same time to start understanding that other solutions will be required, because right now it will only be escalation for François Hollande and France.
Asif Arif, whatever happens and whatever the longer-term fortunes the French government's fight against the Islamic State group on the ground and at home against its believers, those who adhere to its principles in terms of security, this is going to get worse before it gets better, and we're going to have more of these kind of attacks on a regularity, and that is frightening.
Yeah, I think, we can see the last couple of weeks. I mean, it goes by increasing every day. And each and every day, being a Muslim in France is having we are going through a very weird phases, because we are seeing these people who are like, oh God, please don't say that I'm coming from Daesh, or don't say, because the debate will go on and on and on, And what they did actually today, and I have to pay my condolences to all the family of the victims today. They just attacked some of our brothers, and the Christian community here in France. Yes, they are severely attacked today, but I think they know that if they need a shoulder, they can come to their Muslim brother, and they will always be there for them. So I think this is the message. And, of course, we'll see an increasing of these type of attacks.
Yann Saint-Pierre, have the French, its population, its government, been naive? Should we not have expected that the war that's being fought in Iraq and Syria would, in a sense, be fought on the streets of France as well?
I wouldn't call it naivety. I think, Mr. Farif really alluded to this. We're used to, even not just in France, but in Germany as well, in Great Britain, to saying, well, the authorities have the power to do this. We trust them to do this. I think right now what France is realizing is the same way what Israel realized decades ago. Basically, violence is part of our daily lives, political violence, and everybody needs to be a part of the solution. And that means, France, without being naive, needs to understand now that, the days where only the government, only authorities were in charge of security, those days are gone. And everybody needs to put the shoulder to the wheel and make sure that all the resources are at hand and used properly to protect the population.
Asif Arif, listen to you both. One understands the need for cohesion, the need for gathering together, for avoiding the sorts of divisions that the Islamic State group are trying to create. And yet we're entering an electoral period here in France, inevitably, and we saw it after Nice. We've seen it again today. The opposition will speak out more forcefully, perhaps, than it did in the wake of the attacks after Charlie Hebdo and the 13th of November, partly because we're entering an electoral period, partly because the population are fed up with this sort of attack and are fed up with the fact that the government has not managed to bring them to an end.
Yes, of course. I mean, when you have these type of attacks, and when you have all the same solution, because these solutions that they're putting on the table or they're debating in the National Assembly, they are not from yesterday. They are from a couple of months. They were talking about it right after Charlie Hebdo attack. So I think the main problem is that we have no solution at all, because the thing is, this type of attack are so ununderstandable for a normal human being that we cannot try to fix it out is basically to put one guy who is surveilling each and every people every day, 24/7, and that's not possible. So we need to find out, something more cohesive. It can be the discussion in between intelligence services. We have struggle to discuss. Some people have some information and some other have other information, and they are not talking.
This is one of the points, Yann Saint-Pierre, that has clearly come out in the wake of the last 18 months, that there is a problem of coordination between France's security services.
Absolutely, but that's again not being adapted to the new way of doing things. It could have changed after September 11th. There was enough material there to say, well, we need to improve collaboration. But things went well in Europe. Europe was partially spared, aside from the attacks from in Madrid and in London. But Europe as a whole was fairly protected within that decade. And so the need to reform, the need to change a mentality, the need to change a culture wasn't really there. And now they're trying to play catch up. So trying to compensate after for 18 months suddenly to say, well, we're open, we'll change the way we've done things for decades is very difficult to do. Some are still reluctant because they want to be not necessarily to have the glory, but yeah, that's a huge point.
And yet, for the time being, and very briefly, Asif Arif, 18 months on, the French are very cross that this particular failing, the lack of coordination, has not been fixed. It should have been fixed after Charlie Hebdo.
It should have been fixed because it has been fixed for some while. Right after the Charlie Hebdo attack, what happened is that the Kouachi brother, when they run away and everything, Bernard Cazeneuve called a secret meeting in between all the different members of intelligence of different bodies. And they talk together. And when they talk together, they make a good result. So this was the good point. So they know how to do it. They have all the means to do it. So they should do it.
It's time they did. Asif Arif, Yann Saint-Pierre, thank you very much indeed for being with us on tonight's debate.